Okay, so you guys sent in quite a few sources about taxes.
Yeah.
On overtime and tips. And I got to say, it's a little confusing at first glance.
Yeah.
So we've got articles like overtime and tips, taxation legislation and updates,
Right.
which it sounds pretty straightforward. But then you start seeing things like no tax on this and then overtime tax bill for that.
Right.
And it's like, wait a minute, what's
Well,
going on here?
No, that's a really good point.
So help me out here. What's the real deal with all this?
Well, it definitely seems like we're dealing with some information that's kind of murky, you know, and it's not uncommon for tax laws to be changing and kind of in flux.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
You know, what might seem like a simple yes or no answer actually has a lot more kind of nuance hidden in the details.
Okay, so let's break it down a little bit because several of the sources mention no tax on overtime.
Right.
Some even say no taxes on overtime, but then other sources mention tax on overtime and even an overtime tax bill.
Right.
It's like, I need a spreadsheet to keep track of all this. Is this just bad reporting? Or is there actually...
Well, I think it's probably more than just bad reporting. I think this is kind of indicative of potential changes that are happening, you know, because tax laws are constantly being debated and revised. So, you know, it's possible that no tax on overtime could refer to a specific proposal or a future goal, whereas something like overtime tax bill might be talking about a change in how overtime is taxed, maybe a lower rate or different deductions, but not necessarily eliminating it completely.
You know, what's funny is that whenever I hear no tax, my ears perk up.
Oh, yeah.
But then I remember my history with tax forms, and I'm like, okay.
Right.
What's the catch here? What's the fine print?
Absolutely, yeah.
And especially when we see a question like, when does no tax on overtime start?
Right.
It's like they're dangling this carrot. But not telling you when you can have a bite.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that kind of uncertainty can be really important for people who rely on overtime pay, you know?
Right.
Because imagine budgeting, you know, based on the assumption that you won't have to pay taxes on your overtime and then finding out that that hasn't actually gone into effect yet. That could really mess things up.
That could be a problem.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to kind of stay informed and look for those specific bill numbers and legislative updates rather than just relying on those.
Yeah, catchy phrases.
Catchy phrases. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to tips because the sources were just as jumbled on this topic. We see no tax on tips, no taxes on tips bill, but also just plain old tax on tips. It's like, are we looking at the same kind of thing? Is this?
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Future versus current reality.
Yeah, it's possible. And what I think is really interesting here is that we could be seeing a difference between state laws and federal laws.
Got it.
So, for example, you could be a server in California and you see a headline that says, no tax on tips bill passed. But did that pass in the California legislature? Or did that pass, you know, at the federal level? That makes a big difference because your tips could be tax-free at the state level, but still taxable.
At the federal?
Federally, So it's really important to dig into those specifics.
Yeah, so, let's say I'm that server in California. And I see this no tax on tips thing, and I'm like, that sounds awesome. How do I actually figure out what applies to me? Like right now. Like, will my paycheck magically be bigger?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, it's usually not that simple. You know, a change in the law doesn't necessarily mean that your paycheck changes overnight. There could be delays in the implementation. Or your employer might need time to adjust their payroll systems. And even if a no tax bill passes, it might only apply to certain types of income or have certain conditions attached to it.
So what does this all mean for, like, the average listener who's trying to understand their paycheck and plan for their future? It feels like we've gone from taxes are confusing to tax legislation is like this ever-changing puzzle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
You know, it's important to remember that tax laws are not static. They're constantly being proposed and debated. Amended, sometimes even repealed. So relying on those general phrases can be very misleading. You really need to go beyond those headlines. Look for those specific bill numbers. Look for the dates. that they were passed, and then, like, really look at what they say.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really eye-opening for me. I think it's easy to get caught up in, like, the promises of no taxes.
Absolutely.
But as we've seen, the reality is
it's much more
complicated than that. So
nuanced. Yeah.
For everyone listening out there, remember, stay curious.
Yeah.
Keep digging deeper.
Yes.
And never be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Well, thank you so much for
thank you.
helping us navigate all of these murky waters.
It was my pleasure.
All right.
Absolutely.
That's it for today's deep dive. We'll be back next week with
sounds great.
Another set of sources to take a look at.
Looking forward to it.
See you then.
See you later.